Secretary General of the Mission to Seafarers, and I am also the chairman of the International Christian Maritime Association, who are, of course, very privileged and pleased to be partners in this Crew Connect Europe conference. So welcome to you all. Resilience is a word often used through COVID, and perhaps we need to define it a bit. It really means the ability to recover quickly from difficulties. One definition I liked was around the ability of something or someone to spring back into shape. The ability to be resilient is always crucial to seafarers, but never more so than in these last 18 months. The pandemic swept in with very little warning and with drastic impacts for us all, but with seafarers, as we all know, facing very special challenges and very particular vulnerabilities. On a personal level, we all know something of the ups and downs of our own mental health. Sometimes circumstances can collude to make us feel particularly fragile and vulnerable. Tiredness, overwork, family issues, health concerns, lack of support can all contribute to our ability to cope and flex, especially when added difficulties are thrust on us. The combination of our fragilities and testing issues can be particular triggers for us to act or behave in unexpected and sometimes out of character ways, potentially even self-destructive ones. In community and operational settings, such as on board ship, these can be particularly bad for the well-being of the individual, can impact on the wider crew, and perhaps even pose safety threats to the vessel. And of course, creating deep and frightening anxieties for those back home feeling powerless. For seafarers, many of the natural family and friend support networks which many of us turn to in difficult times are not around. I'm sure many on this conference will have some personal resonance with the issue of resilience, especially in these days when thankfully there is much more openness about mental health. And many will have deep understanding of what seafarers have been facing. One crew member told us at the height of the crew change crisis that there was no tomorrow, and without a tomorrow, there was no hope. And one of our chaplains talked about a mental health epidemic paralleling the pandemic. At the outset of our conversation, I want to salute the seriousness with which so much of the industry has taken this issue. An often hidden problem has become very visible. Many steps have been taken, progress has been made, and it is my hope that one of the positives coming out of this pandemic will be long-term changes in supporting resilience amongst seafarers, a major contribution to a fairer future for them. And it's also vital, and we heard of something about this yesterday, in keeping seafarers wanting to come to sea. So in that context, I turn to our panel, and I'm going to ask to introduce themselves briefly and then make their opening statements. So Catherine, over to you. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Catherine Spencer. I'm the Chief Executive of the Seafarers Charity. Do you want me to do my opening statement now, Andrew?
Please do.
Yeah,
please go for it.
Okay. So yes, thank you for that, Andrew. The Seafarers Charity has been a grant awarding organisation since 1917, and we work across the industry supporting charity organisations, so we delivery partners, to ensure that we are supporting a really wide range of different activities to support seafarers, with absolutely that view of building resilience. I'm really interested in the term resilience and like the way that you described it, Andrew, because I think it's important that when we think of resilience, that we are thinking of making lives better. And in fact, in our to give our own strategy a plug, we've said that we want seafarers to thrive. I think there's a danger when we talk about resilience that we could end up with an acceptance that life is really difficult for seafarers for a variety of different reasons, those that you spoke about. And so we really need to be thinking about where are the gaps and how do we improve life. And you're absolutely right in terms of mental health and all the triggers which can contribute to it. And I have a lot of empathy for that. I haven't served at sea, but I have lived in some pretty difficult environments, including 4 years in Bangladesh, where I found that my own mental health was constantly under pressure from a wide range of challenges. So I'm really well aware of how all of these triggers, like particularly in the pandemic, like lack of future and insecurity over jobs and lack of communication, can add to seafarers' difficulties. And of course, if you're spending a lot of time on your own without any activities, that can add to it. So some of the things that we've put in place to help seafarers, particularly in the pandemic, is a grant to Befrienders Worldwide, which is of course another tool which for seafarers who are considering suicide or feeling extremely depressed can speak to Befrienders Worldwide, who are a Samaritans type organisation. And that's something that I think we were aware is a really useful tool for seafarers, as well as being able to contact your own organisation under Mission to Seafarers, because you'll be well aware that we provided money towards your transition to online chaplaincy. But suicide remains an issue, and I think it's something the industry have got to take really seriously. Last year, the Seafarers charity led a campaign to try and get the recording of suicide and indeed death at sea mandatory, and it's something that we continue to work on in terms of ensuring that we get a better picture of deaths at sea. At the moment, it's not mandatory to record deaths at sea, and we know that some countries are better at it than others, but we really need a clear picture so that organisations that work in this sector can better provide and better understand those triggers that might lead to suicide and severe mental health issues.
Thank you, Catherine. That's really, really important. And maybe we can return to that later in discussion. So one or two of those issues, but that key issue around suicide, which I think is a significant rate. You've raised significant questions in the pandemic, which has been very important, I think. Sara, can we go to you now? You're relatively new to the sector. You're seeing it with fresh eyes. We're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Andrew. And yeah, thank you. So I'm Sara Baad. I'm the Chief Executive for the Sailor Society. And for those of you very briefly don't know about Sailor Society, obviously we were founded over 200 years ago, back in 1818. And we have operated providing dedicated support for merchant seafarers ever since then. And we do that through a number of different ways. Obviously, we go on board and we meet with seafarers, but we also do it at home to the families and the communities. And that's something that we're really proud of widening that support that we provide to the seafaring community. And through the pandemic and COVID, we've continued to do that, both through our chaplaincy work, but also through our wellness program. And I think it's the wellness program I particularly would like to think about. You asked me, how do we deal with resilience? I think wellness and resilience goes very close and hand in hand, really. And I think wellness is incredibly important to consider for the whole crew. And I know that's what we're going to talk a little bit more on in due time. I just want to say, we talked about mental health and we talked about physical well-being, but I think wellness is a lot more than that. And as you know, Andrew, already, we have for many years developed our Wellness at Sea program, which is a program that is looking at a more holistic approach to wellness, which also therefore builds resilience. And that holistic approach is very much looking at 5 major areas. It's the social element, it's emotional, the physical, intellectual, and the spiritual. So all those 5 things together bring a more holistic sort of approach of looking at wellness and the importance. And by looking at those, you're preparing seafarers for whatever is to come. So it's building resilience before the issue is becoming a big one. And we have in the past, during the pandemic, we launched a wellness campaign, which was a 27-week campaign, where we provided free of charge a campaign that could be launched by ship owners or manning agencies or whoever wanted to provide that wellness in a structured way to their crew, etc. And we're just about to launch a second version of that in the next week to come. But this time, we've learned from the first one, learned from what the pandemic had, and we're going to launch it, still continuing to seafarers, but also widening it to the families and the communities. And we're really excited about that, because that's something where we see there's a real need to look at that wellness, both in a wider sense, in terms of the 5 different areas, but also in a wider sense in terms of it's not just a seafarer here, it is the family and community as well. So I think when we're talking about resilience, for me, a lot of the work that we have done, in addition to obviously the work, the everyday sort of work that Sailor Society do with our chaplaincy and our ship visiting, etc. For me, it's about building resilience by providing the wellness skills needed to be able to cope with difficult times.
Thank you very much, Sara. I mean, I must say that taking on your role in the middle of the pandemic must have required a particular resilience of its own. It was very, very demanding, and it's great to have you in the sector. Frank, you're the one person I haven't met, I don't think, before today. Absolutely great to have you on the call, and to hear and over to you then to tell us who you are and give us something of your early perspectives on this topic.
Yeah, I'm Frank with the Norwegian Seamen's Church. I'm based in Stavanger. And I've been in the organization for about 12, 13 years now. And with this particular duty I do now is to visit ships, mostly in Norway. It's offshore ships, some in Europe, and occasionally I go worldwide. If I do that, it's mostly for emergency and crisis calls. Of course, since our duties and our work is based on visiting on board, everything was shut down, and we were just going into home office completely March 12th last year. We are the organization has churches around the world, physically in 25, 26 places. But we are a small group that are just visiting ships, and we don't normally have a place for, so we work from home. But we had to shift focus. How can we meet the crew? How can we serve them? How can we tend to them? So we started with something we call the phone call visits. So we had to get all the information about ships, phone numbers, other ways to contact them, and we started to call them. All of the ships, we normally got to the bridge, and we could ask them how they are, but the limit was that we only met one person. Instead of when we visit on board, we would meet the whole crew, spend the day and meet the whole crew. I think it was a learning process for all of us, not just those on board that had to deal with the shifting rules, what to do, how could they change, what could they do when there was a crew change, what should they do before they enter the ship. And it was a learning process for us too, about how could we stay in contact with the crew and the ships. The Seamen's Church has 155-year long history and a relationship with seafarers and with the ship owners. So we work well with the ship owners, so getting all the information we need is not a problem. So we have been able to stay in contact with the seafarers through phone calls. We have experienced that going digital on Teams and so on can be a challenge, because there's a bad connection if they are out to sea, and even if they are in ports, there can be a bad connection. We have had experiences with the crew that have had difficulties like mental issues. We have had crews that are stuck on board, not able to come home. And the ship owners have called us, can we be the person that follow up that person for the period it takes for them to be able to go home? And doing that, we have also experienced that it is a challenge for us to be in that position. we focus on the crew, like here and this conference, but also the helper need backup and help. Because when I was in, I was staying, there was one captain that I called every day for over 2 months, and I experienced that his mental health was grew worse. He was, and that took an impact on me too. And he was on the edge of collapsing, but luckily they were able to take him off the ship then. But we have learned a lot on the same thing, that we got more information. There's aspects with the industry and what we do that we have learned a lot of. I think the crew has, during the time, during this pandemic, they have been a stronger crew on board. They are helped themselves very much. At least we experience that. We serve normally Norwegians or Norwegian flagships, but also the Filipinos on board that are mixed with the Norwegian. And we experience that they are good talking to each other. They are helping each other, and we come in when it's needed. I think I'll leave it with that for now.
Thank you, Frank. I mean, that last point seems to be so important to me. I mean, the way I think, that at the end of the day, whilst we as organizations, for example, and indeed shipping companies can do significant amounts in supporting seafarer resilience, at the end of the day, a lot of the care has to come from within the crew. And I think that whole business about preparing crew to look after their own mental health, helping crew look after their own well-being and their own mental health, the kind of thing that Sara's trying to do, through the Sailor Society Wellness at Sea program, and there are others out there as well. But also crew need to learn to look after each other, and to go reference the suicide issue, for example. I mean, just recognizing the signs to look out for if one of your crew members may be at risk. These things are really important. So learning to support yourself, learning to support each other. And I think as societies, as an industry, one of the crucial things is preparing, is building up that resilience work to do just that. A couple of other things from me before we move on. I think obviously most of the ICMA societies are providing face-to-face support. Obviously, that's been more limited in the pandemic, but we have maintained, most of us, ship visiting at the gangway in a distance and safe way. It's not quite the same interacting with people with masks and so on, but nevertheless, that has continued. But one of the issues we have had, and this is a good conference perhaps to just underline this issue, is in numbers of ports around the world, including some pretty crucial ones like Singapore, we've been very, very restricted in our ability to access the ships in any way, even in that gangway visitation. And I think we'd all plead with the industry in terms of resilience for seafarers, supporting the face-to-face work of the main welfare charities, around the world, and the welfare support systems in maritime is absolutely crucial. And I would urge all those on the call to use their influence to try and make that possible. And that's an important learning, I think, from the pandemic, recognizing our teams as key workers, as well as recognizing seafarers as key workers. I think you've mentioned digital work, several of you. That's obviously been a big learning, not only for the societies, but also salute many shipping companies who've put in place, access to counselling 24 hours a day, psychologists on call, helplines you can ring, that kind of thing. All that has been really, really important, and it's been a big feature, I think, of the and we all recognise that digital will have some place in that system. And I also want to address another issue, which is sometimes the societies, in terms of resilience, are accused of tackling the symptoms without tackling the root causes. I know that's something quite dear to Catherine's heart, and you may want to comment on this, Catherine. But I think I very much want to say that yes, of course, we do try and treat the symptoms. That's important. That's why charities exist. That's what we're here for. But at the same time, we are pretty vocal, I think, many of us, about some of the things which are lie behind some of the big macro issues which need to be addressed. And again, much of the shipping company is addressing them, others less so. But we think about things like, work-life balance for seafarers, the contract length, the number of crew, because obviously more and more crew now are feeling isolated. The smaller the crews get, isolation is more easier. Supporting community building on board ship, increased opportunity for social activity, and very importantly, of course, making the internet available, on a permanent and free basis. Numbers of ships do that, but many don't. And during the pandemic, that's been a huge issue. If you can't access Wi-Fi and you're not able to get shore leave, how do you talk to your families? And one of the things we've been doing is trying to deliver Wi-Fi units where we can to support that. So I think, so just a few things from me, perhaps just to get our discussion going. Catherine, I'm just going to ask you actually, because I know you've been a big advocate of these bigger issues. Do you want to make any comment on that? Because I do think it's important that in looking at resilience, we're looking at the big issues and not just the symptoms, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. And I think one of the things we're trying to address at the Seafarers charity is dealing with current issues through looking at what those challenges are and supporting seafarers facing hardship and creating programs which build resilience. But we know that there's a much bigger piece of work to do in terms of understanding how the sector works. And I think, Andrew, when I first came into this job and met you, we talked about the type of hardship that we see in different parts of the world. And I think we agreed that within the UK and the shipping industry, actually there isn't generally acute need in the UK. It's in the other parts of the world that we see that. So I think one of the keys to this is probably the consumer, and we know that consumers are becoming more ethical. I mean, if we look at, say, for example, the ready-made clothing industry, we know that people are beginning to think about wanting to buy products which have been produced ethically and understanding how workers are treated. I see that extending to all parts of the supply chain. I'd love to see some sort of system where the consumer can see which part, can tell that the product they're buying has been manufactured and transported in conditions which are ethical, where everybody involved in that process has been working for an organization which is considered to treat people fairly. And I think it's possible that we will get to that state in the future. And I think, as you said, a lot of shipping companies are trying to do the best for their seafarers, to pay them fairly and treat them fairly. But obviously there are those that don't as well. So we need to consider as an industry how we can promote the good, praise the good, and through, I think consumers are really key here. If you're more likely to buy a product because it's been manufactured and moved in really ethical conditions, then perhaps that will persuade more people to move towards good practice. But yes, in the short term, we really need to be calling out those shipping companies and organisations where seafarers are not treated appropriately, and that's going to be a joint effort from governments. And I think we've seen enormous amount of effort through organisations like the International Chamber of Shipping to improve life for seafarers during the pandemic. There's been incredible collaborative work, but it perhaps just hasn't moved quickly enough. The key worker status of seafarers being one of those, and then the need to get seafarers vaccinated. And that's obviously a current problem, but yeah, how do we all work together better to produce this better life? So as well as looking at resilience, it's also how do we improve life? So actually the level of resilience you need is less because your life is better.
Thank you, Catherine. Sara, can I just move on to you and pose a particular question? Because your Sailor Society's got a lot of experience working digitally, and I just want, I think it's worth, I think a lot of people think, oh well, let's get some digital systems in, and it's been particularly important during the pandemic for obvious reasons. But I just wonder if you could comment on, the strengths and indeed the limitations of digital when it comes to building resilience amongst seafarers, and how you think the balance should be between digital work and face-to-face work, whatever form that might take.
Yeah, no, of course. I think nothing can really replace face-to-face. I'll be honest with you. I think that you get a different depth and you get closer to the problem much quicker if you have a face-to-face interaction. But during the pandemic, as you said, we have really been challenged on that, and we've had to go down the digital thing. And we had a number of things that we have set up. As you said, we have worked quite a lot on the digital side before the pandemic that have come into flourishing massively now during the last year and a bit. One of those, for example, we've set up peer-to-peer support groups over WhatsApp, which has been really, really successful in terms of actually seafarers talking to each other, using the digital platform for them to reach out to each other away from their own ship. Getting that support from somewhere else has been a really, really successful sort of program that we set up before the pandemic, but again, that became really, really important. We've also opened up our chat lines to go in line with our helpline. So for those that just wanted to chat to a chaplain and they had the opportunity to do so, again, that's been really, just during the pandemic, we've seen over 500 different seafarers come to us through chats. And we often see the demographic of them are maybe the younger seafarers as well. So again, a different way of reaching out and using the digital platform to go to them. Something that we started up in 2015 already is the Ship Visitor app, which is another way of using digital and platforms to support the welfare and the crew welfare. And the Ship Visitor app started up initially as an administrative tool, a way for us to record when we did ship visiting, what kind of ships did we go and see, what did we see, what did we experience, etc. And it gave us the impact to see the work that we were doing. But we quite soon realised that this was a digital tool that we could use and widen. And with the help of ITF at the time, we then opened it up to all the ICMA users free of charge, so they could also use it. And what that has done is that we're actually, this month, coming up to having reached out to 1 million seafarers. We have the data from 1 million seafarers on this digital app. And that creates an amazing insight into crew welfare in Israel, because we have 23 charities, including Mission to Seafarers, for example, using the app now and recording what they're seeing during ship visiting.
Thank you very much, Sara. And indeed, that has been a brilliant tool. The chaplaincy app's been an excellent tool. Frank, do you want to comment on? You've mentioned already the digital and the face-to-face.
Yes.
And obviously, both of your work's face-to-face, but I'd be really interested to hear you comment on this.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to follow up what something Catherine said, is that we can be the voice for the sailors and seafarers out in society. Because here in Norway, we experience that they are very much focused on the pandemic on shore, and not the role, the key factor the seafarers play in actually transporting medicines and face masks. So they should be lifted up and be more in the spotlight, and how important their work are. When it comes to digital meetings, as I said, we have been calling them, but also we have done digital Teams meetings in certain situations. We had 2 or 3 emergency crisis cases. One was that we had I had to work with a Catholic pastor, a priest here in Stavanger, and we had a Teams meeting with a ship in Panama last year, and also this year we had with a ship in Maldives, because we were prevented from going there. There was no air flights. There was strict restrictions, so we could not come into the country. This year we could not come to Maldives because we were not allowed to go on board. And they both had experienced that a crew had died on board, so it was imperative and that they received a blessing of the ship and the crew. So what do? Well, we had to have the memorial service and the blessing on Teams meeting. But that was tough because the lines or the connection was not so good. But eventually we were able to do it. And I think the crew was happy with what we'd done. But it's not the same thing as being there. As Sara said, face to face and just being there. Normally we are on board in the environment for a couple of days, and we get to have conversations individually with each crew or in a group, and conversations, they evolve in some way. And there's so many things that you can talk with the crew when you're face to face that we cannot do in a digital room. But at the same time, it's like a solution, a last solution when we cannot meet up. But we have to hold on that face-to-face meetings is the most important thing we can do. And for us, we have to see the whole person, as mentioned here, and holistic approach. It's body, soul, and spirit. And when it opens up again, we need to be there. We need to meet them face to face. It's very important. Digital meetings, it's just a tool. The other thing is that Teams and digital meetings have kind of cut us short of getting in touch with officers in some way. When we try to call crew managers, crew coordinators, or other people, they are also always busy in meetings. So it's hard to meet them, even on a Teams meeting.
Thank you, Frank. I know you've picked up you've picked up on that holistic word there, and I think that is so important. And obviously, all of the ICMA societies work holistically. You know, reaching out to all seafarers, of course, regardless of nationality or faith, and usually in very practical ways. And there's always complete respect and sensitivity for seafarers. And it's one reason I think that we're all able to operate and enjoy the support of port authorities and the maritime industry, because they do trust our holistic approach. But also the ICMA societies also have a faith base and recognize that, you know, physical, mental and spiritual means of support are all important in the resilience process. And for me, that word spiritual is a very wide thing. For many seafarers, faith and prayer, regardless of religion, plays an important role in their lives, and access to worship can be very important. Obviously, that's available in many seafarer centres when they can open. Practicing mindfulness, finding space for reflection and thinking, these can all be important in building resilience. And all this can easily come under pressure in a shipboard environment. And I think this emphasis on a full holistic approach is really important in terms of that resilience question. I don't know if any of the panel would like to comment on that. I think it's important to make that point and, you know, follow on from what Frank said there. Does anyone want to comment on that? How has the pandemic changed your societies in the way that you might approach seafarer resilience going forward? I mean, it's obviously been a big period of change, and I wonder how it's affected your societies.
Yeah, we're looking at, I think there needs to be a piece of joined up work, and the charities have worked so well together. The Surf Fund being a brilliant example of that, which of course Andrew and Sara, your organisations, are involved with. And of course the industry has been brilliant at coming forward, and we've nearly reached that $1 million mark to support activities through the pandemic. But in India, but once we, you know, at some point we hope we will get into, I guess, what we would call normal jogging, and at that point we're going to need to look at what's changed since before the pandemic and afterwards. We're going to have an enormous amount of people whose resilience is at an all-time low, both financially and mentally. So there's a huge amount of work that we need to do to understand what the situation is. the SURF Fund is supporting that acute need at the moment, but there's obviously going to be longer term need, and we need to understand what that is, working with the industry and the charities. The Seafarers charity released an extra £2 million worth of money to create projects throughout the pandemic, and I think we're going to need to look really carefully at what needs to be provided post-pandemic.
Thank you, Catherine. A quick comment from Sara and Frank, just briefly, because I've got a question coming now, and we've got a couple of questions to go. So briefly, Sara.
Yeah, no, very briefly. I think the pandemic, I echo what Catherine said, it's really brought to the forefront the importance of partnership working and really seeing how we can complement each other in the sector to provide that welfare to the seafaring community. But I think also it's really brought to light, and I certainly don't want to say that the pandemic has brought anything positive with it. That's not what I'm saying, but it has brought a highlight into the importance of crew welfare. And I do think that's something that we will continue to work with. We have worked on that welfare for a long time, but we will up our game even further to really make sure that we are meeting the demands around the crew for that welfare and what more we can be doing in around that sphere together to complement, obviously, the work that we're already doing and the bit that we mentioned before, that face-to-face work that our chaplaincy team is doing. So I think that's the main thing that I think we've learned from building resilience in our own organisation.
Thank you, Sara. And Frank, just briefly on from Norwegian's perspective.
Yeah, well, I think that we see the fruits of the work we have done for over 100 years, that we have a good relationship both with the seafarers, but also the ship owners. And I think both Sara and Catherine mentioned the most important things. So,
Thank you, and I'll just pick up on that partnership point mentioned by Sara there. That this is what's so brilliant about this conference. I think working together. I mean, all of us are completely dependent on partnership with the shipping industry. It's important for every aspect of what we do. Access to ports. The trust people have in us to deliver our services. I think we would say that we are a service deliverer alongside other service deliverers in the sector, and that partnership thing is crucial. And in terms of resilience for seafarers, I think a huge amount of partnership growth during this pandemic period, which has been brilliant. I'd love to see that continue across the shipping industry and including the societies, the welfare delivery societies as well. So we've had a question come in. Other than the obvious impact on mental health this pandemic has brought to the seafarers, are there data which show the impact this pandemic has brought on safety on board? Catherine, you're into data big time at the Seafarers Charity for obvious reasons, impact measurement and so on. I don't know if you can directly answer that question, but perhaps a comment from you would be helpful.
I don't think I can directly answer that question, but we certainly fund CHIRP, which is of course an organisation that looks into accidents that happen at sea, and safety is absolutely one of our 5 themes. So it's an area that we're really interested in, but it's not something I can give you an answer to today, I'm afraid.
Sara, have you got any insights on that?
No, but like Catherine, I think that data and impact is incredibly important in terms of all the work that we do, and being able to measure it is a question that I posed myself, not having had a very good answer to yet. So no, I can't, but I think it's a good question.
Yeah, Frank, I mean, I'm sure I think the whole industry would accept that some of the pressures that have been on seafarers over these last months logic would say they pose a threat to safety. When people are very tired, we know, or struggling, or their mental health is poor, we know that these are things when misjudgments can be made. But I agree, perhaps very difficult to actually have any data on that, and that's an interesting question. But Frank, any comment?
Well, I hope the ship owners themselves do have some surveys on how the pandemic have impacted the safety. I think the crucial and for those who stays normally long on board in the offshore fleet in Norway, they only stay for 4 or 5 weeks, so that's not a threat to the safety. But if you go worldwide on tanker or chemical ships, where you're normally for 2 months, 3 months, and for the Philippines, they are actually up to 7, 8 months. And that if they overstay, they are clearly posing a threat to the safety and on board. And I think we have read some articles about that.
Thank you, Frank. we're moving towards the conclusion of our meeting. I think my final major question to pose to, again, I'm asking you to be brief, we've got 5 minutes left, is around, we've already touched on this, but just from each of you, what would you like to see, what major change would you like to see within the shipping industry emerging from the pandemic to support long-term resilience? Is there one thing that really strikes you as really something you'd like to stress and see into the future? Again, perhaps start. Yeah, again, if you don't mind starting, Catherine. Sorry, it was always a difficult.
Yeah, I think we've been really impressed by the funding for the SURF Fund, which is, of course, this emergency response. I think there is already an understanding that hopefully the response and activity that the welfare charities have provided to their seafarers has proven to the industry how incredibly valuable the Seafarers charity and other charities are. So I guess what I'd like to see is a really long-term commitment of funding towards maritime organisations and working with maritime charity organisations to ensure that we're meeting all the needs of seafarers.
Thank you, Catherine. Sara?
I think kind of is similar to say the continuation of putting importance onto crew welfare, which is seen highlighted during the pandemic, and the continuation, I would say, of partnerships. So kind of repeating what we talked a little bit about before. But I think those are the two major things I would like to see continue. Thank
you, Sara. That's great. Frank?
Yes.
Profound thought from you.
Yeah, I'd like the shipping industry to focus on the crew, acknowledge how important the crew is, and they can have the best equipment, the newest equipment, the best systems and everything, but without the crew feeling good, being in peace with themselves, the ship is not going to work. So they need to also acknowledge all the organization, the charity organization, welfare organization, Seamen's missions that do work which is so important, taking care of the person, like body, soul and spirit, because it is so important, and we need to keep that up. We are working differently from a doctor, we are working differently from a psychologist, so we are more, I think we see people in another way, which is very important.
Thank you, Frank. I think it's important. I think we all agree that there's many people on this call from the shipping industry. Many of those involved with crew have been brilliant during the pandemic, no question about it. We do want to absolutely sound the drum for that. It's been incredible what much of the shipping industry has done, and it's been a privilege to have worked with them in a kind of new way or with a new perspective. There's a question come in: do you think after the pandemic there'll be more cooperation between maritime welfare organisations? And I think the answer to that is there is already a lot of. The SURF Fund is a good example. I think a lot of people don't see what the industry does. Hang on, a lot of people don't see what the shipping industry does in terms of what the maritime organisations do in partnership. There's a lot of it around. I think we've grown together further over this pandemic, and yes, absolutely, working together is great for seafarers, and it's sensible in terms of the way we're resourced by the industry as well. So, absolutely. And a final thought from me, I just to finish. In one recent survey, to the question, I feel valued in my role, just 8% of seafarers said they strongly agreed. 35% agreed and 30% somewhat agreed, but 27% disagreed with that statement, I feel valued in my role, and 15% strongly disagreed with the statement, I feel valued in my role. And I think perhaps a challenge going forward. There's nothing better for your resilience than to feel valued. If you feel recognized, valued, and visible, that is a real great thing in people, in people feeling strong as they move into crisis and difficult situations. So perhaps that's the challenge to all of us to finish with, finding every way we can to make seafarers feel heard and valued, because their role has clearly been absolutely heroic. So I'm asked to wrap up now. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a long day ahead on this conference. We're all looking forward to it. There's going to be a bit of a break now. There's going to be a promo video before we move on to the next section. So happy days, happy evening, happy afternoon, happy morning to all of you, and look forward to seeing you later in the conference. Thank you all very much, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Discover the best industry-focused content with the Maritime Online series, bringing you the best of maritime insight and discussion. Say hello to thought-provoking content available live or on demand. 5 weeks, 5 themes. Each week will bring a new focus.